Hello class, this is the final part of chapter 3. It won't be as long as the other videos, but it is about socialization across the life course. And so we're going to start by introducing what is the life course perspective. So the life course perspective is just arguing that your societal expectations, your norms, your roles, they change as you kind of age from being a child to being an elderly person. And so this is true with socialization. So the question to consider for all of these ages is, what does it mean to be a blank? So what is the social meaning, the social expectations associated with this life course? So the first stage in the life course is childhood, birth to 12 years. What does it mean to be a child? Well, one thing to consider is what your book notes, that the value of childhood has changed. Children used to be seen as mini adults and they were treated as such, but that is now shifted. We have labor laws. Parents see their children as like an investment in the sense that they see it as their job, not just to love and care for them, but to also figure out their talents and abilities and gifts to help them get a good start on life and having a successful adulthood. And so because of this changing value of childhood, there have been resulting changes in child rearing practices. So things that we used to think of as being acceptable, we are perhaps starting to question. Things like, for instance, corporal punishment. The next stage in the life course is adolescence. This is 13 to 17 years. What does it mean to be an adolescent? Well, one thing to consider is adolescence, or being a teenager, is a fairly modern social invention. It used to be you went straight from childhood to being an adult. Women got married at 14, 15 because that corresponded with their ability to, have a child. Men got married a little later, but that had a lot more to do with them having to wait until they were financially independent and could support a family. But they had usually been in the workforce, labor force itself, for years. So we didn't really create this idea of an adolescent or a teenager until the early 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, as we started to create space in society for children to do things like go to school, middle school, high school, college, as opposed to immediately entering the workforce. And when they were in school, of course, that the expectations about what it meant to be a student versus what it meant to be a worker kind of created or led to the shift where we no longer saw adolescents as being fully adults. And this is now reflected in the fact that most states that have an age of consent, or an age at which we start to consider someone being an adult, in most states it's somewhere near those latter parts of adolescence, 16 at the youngest, but in a lot of states it is 17 and 18. A big part of adolescence is just kind of figuring out your own identity, and that's important because when you know who you are, you know what's coming next in terms of school, work, marriage. An even newer life course stage is transitional adulthood, and that's from 18 to 29. And this new stage is, for some people, a little controversial because it's what does it mean to be a transitional adult? If you are an adult, in terms of your age, how is that a transition? And it has a lot to do with what your answer to the question, what does it mean to be a real adult, or when does one become a real adult? We oftentimes think there are kind of 5 markers of adulthood. Number 1, of course, is having a full-time career, right? Not just job, but an actual career path. Number 2 would be owning your own home. Number 3 would be maybe getting married. Number 4 would be having children. And then number 5 would be starting to plan or save for the next stage in the life course, of course, retirement. And the idea is that once you have hit about 3 of these 5 markers, you are in fact a real adult. So the number of people that used to hit those markers and at the age at which they hit these markers has really changed over the last few decades, as people now are delaying marriage, they're going to school for longer periods because of both student loan debt as well as career fluctuations. They're less likely to buy a home as early as they used to. And so you see a chart here about the percentage of men and women who are fully adults transition to adulthood by age 30. And then here is another chart that kind of makes that same point. As you can see, the number of people that are fully adults at age 20 and 30 has dramatically decreased as you move from the 1960s to the 2010s. And that does mean that there are implications for that in kind of the rest of the life course stages, because when people are transitional adults, right, they're not fully self-sufficient, they're not living on their own, who are they still turning to? Well, in most cases, they're turning to their parents, which means the addition of transitional adulthood has also shifted what it means to be middle age. So the middle years are from 30 to 65 years old, the early middle years are 30 to 49, and the later middle years are 50 to 65. The early middle years, 30 to 49, this is also often the time period that we associate with the midlife crisis, where if life is not working out the way people expected in terms of finances, job, love, children, they can kind of go through a period of crisis as they feel like my life is more than halfway over and I haven't achieved the things that I would like to achieve. But in regards to what I was just saying about the impact of transitional adults on older adults, that really plays out in what we call the later middle years, 50 to 65, because this is the age that a lot of people who are transitional adults, this is the age their parents fall into. And we call this life course stage the sandwich generation. And that's because in addition to taking care of themselves as we would expect adults would, they also are they're often being squeezed or sandwiched in between the demands of their older children who in previous time periods would not be as reliant on their parents as they still are today. And then they are also being squeezed or sandwiched by their own parents, who in previous time periods perhaps would no longer still be alive. But in today's world, because people are living older but not necessarily healthier, that does mean that it oftentimes falls on these later middle year individuals to provide some type of care and assistance, sometimes financial, sometimes actual tangible care and assistance to their parents. Which brings us to the final life course stage, the older years, which is about 65 onward. And so the question here is, what does it mean to be old? Like the same question we asked about childhood and teenage years and early adulthood. This is a shifting meaning. It's culture specific, which means it varies across time and space. If you're transitional older years, 65 to 74, this is the time where traditionally people have been negotiating life post retirement. Of course, changes in our economy and people's financial obligations has seen people less likely to retire early. They're staying in the labor force longer, which impacts the employment opportunities for people that are transitional adults or people who are in their middle years. But part of why people are staying in their jobs longer is because the idea that you're going to retire and then die within the next decade is no longer really true. People are living longer and longer, which brings us to the later older years, age 75 and on. We have seen an increase in centenarians, people who are over the age of 100, in the last few decades as medical technology and other types of medical advances has become a lot more common. So as you can see in that graph there, compared to even 2000, we have seen a doubling, and they expect we will see a even quadrupling of centenarians as time continues to go forward. And even super centenarians have become much more common than they ever were. And a supercentenarian is someone that is 110. So you now see people pop up and they're like 110, 111. I think like the oldest person was like 116. So just basically people are living longer, especially if you are a woman, because that gender gap between men and women in those later older years is 9 to 1. So a lot of women are more likely to live to be a ripe old age than even men. And so once again, they have to be socialized in terms of what does society now expect from you, in terms of norms. And behavior, now that you are a senior citizen. And so that is the final little bit on socialization. um, Please remember that you need to, in addition to watching these slides, that there are slides provided that you can print out and take notes on. You can refer back to your book. Anything that is not in your book, or anything that is in your book but not on any of my slides, feel free to skip that. That means that I'm not requiring you to know